At 75, people expect you to let go of things. Names, dates, small details, or even the reins of your own life. But I've always believed that memory is not a weakness of age. It's the final inheritance you're allowed to keep. And my memories live inside my home like quiet, loyal ghosts. The house sits at the end of a maple-lined street, its white paint a little chipped, its porch creaking when the wind leans on it. Outsiders would call it old. Too old. But when I look at it, I don't see peeling paint or sagging steps. I see the life Daniel and I built from the studs outward. I see his handwriting on the wooden beams he carved our initials into before the drywall went up. I see the afternoon sun pouring through the kitchen window, the way it did when we brought our son, Michael, home from the hospital. I still remember Daniel's laugh echoing on the porch as he taught Michael how to tie his shoelaces. I remember the sting of cold autumn mornings when we raked leaves together. And I remember the warm nights where Daniel and I would sit on the porch swing, hands entwined, talking about the kind of old people we'd become. He always joked that he'd go first so he could get the better room in heaven, ready for me. He kept his promise, though I wish he hadn't. After he passed 5 years ago, the house changed. It felt larger, quieter, and gentler in its grief. A widow's home holds a particular kind of silence, one that hums in the walls like a lullaby you never asked for. Some nights, I swear I can still hear Daniel moving around, his footsteps crossing the kitchen, the soft thump of him setting down his tools. I know it's only memory, but memory has a way of feeling real when you've loved long enough. I filled my days with small, steady rituals, watering the plants, polishing the old wooden banister, reorganizing our photo albums, even though I knew exactly where every picture was. My life became a circle, a quiet, beautiful circle of routine and remembrance. People like to say older women become invisible. Maybe that's true in crowded stores or busy intersections, but not in my home. Here I am seen. I am remembered. I am whole. Which is why the first time my son brought his new wife, Claire, to visit, I felt something shift. A small shift, like a tremor before a storm. Claire was the kind of woman who entered a room with the certainty that she belonged everywhere she stepped. Young, polished, and sharp around the edges, like a glass vase you're afraid to touch in case it shatters or cuts you. She smelled like something expensive, something bought in a store where the clerks whisper. Her eyes flicked around the house, as if she were mentally redrawing it, tidying it up, modernizing it. She complimented my living room in the tone someone uses for a child's drawing on a refrigerator. "This place has character," she said, offering me a smile that didn't touch her eyes. I nodded politely. "It's been my home for a long time." "Oh, I can tell," she replied, her gaze lingering just a second too long on my grandmother's old rocking chair. Michael didn't notice the way her nose wrinkled at the antique wallpaper Daniel and I picked out on our 10th anniversary. He didn't see her slide her fingers across the mantel as if testing it for dust. But I did. I watched everything. As the visit went on, she made little comments. Casual ones. Things she said with a laugh, but with just enough sharpness that I felt the scrape of her words afterwards. "Michael, imagine what we could do with a space like this. This house is so big. Too big for one person. You know, with a few changes, this could look completely different." Every remark was wrapped in softness, but beneath it, I sensed entitlement, like she was measuring the curtains for a future that did not belong to her. Still, I tried to be gracious. I made her tea the way she liked it. No sugar. Extra lemon. I offered her one of Daniel's old sweaters when she said she felt cold. I smiled, even when her tone felt like sandpaper against my patience. Because that's what you do when you're old. You keep the peace. You swallow the sting. You pretend you didn't hear the insult buried inside the compliment. But the truth is I heard everything. And I saw everything. Most of all, I saw the way my son softened under her voice, the way he nodded when she spoke, the way he was becoming a man I didn't quite recognize anymore. That evening, after they left, I walked through each room of my home, touching the walls, letting my fingers brush over the memories tucked behind them. I whispered Daniel's name into the stillness and felt the echo return to me like a reminder. This house holds your life. At the time, I didn't know those words would soon turn into a battle cry. Because while I had spent decades filling this house with love, another woman had already begun plotting how to take it from me. They say betrayal comes like a sudden storm, but that isn't quite true. In my case, it arrived in whispers, quiet, creeping, like a draft slipping under a door you forgot to close. The kind you don't notice until the whole room feels cold. A week after Claire commented that the house was too big for one person, she and Michael started visiting more often. At first, I told myself it was a kindness. Maybe they were worried about me. Maybe they cared. But the truth settled slowly, like dust on a forgotten shelf. They weren't visiting me. They were inspecting. Claire drifted from room to room with the entitlement of someone who believed she already owned everything she touched. She opened cabinets without asking. She stood in the living room doorway the way a realtor does when imagining a different paint color. She even suggested that the old rocking chair, my grandmother's rocking chair, be donated to someone who might appreciate vintage things. Vintage things. That was how she spoke of my memories. My life. Michael didn't stop her. He just looked at me with that apologetic half-smile and said, "She has great taste." Mom. I wanted to tell him taste doesn't matter when the heart behind it is rotten. But what mother wants to admit her son has chosen someone who doesn't understand kindness? What mother wants to believe her child might stand silently beside someone who belittles the home that built him? The breaking point began with something small, little slivers of disrespect that finally became too sharp to ignore. It was a Thursday morning when it happened. The kind of cold morning where your breath hangs in the air, and the sky is a pale imitation of itself. I had a doctor's appointment scheduled, routine blood work and a checkup. Nothing serious. I left the house at 8, locking the door behind me as I always did. I remember touching the doorknob before I left. Cold metal. Familiar weight. I remember thinking how comforting it was that some things never change. But some things do. Oh, how they do. My appointment ended early, and I stopped by the bakery on my way home. I bought a warm loaf of bread, the kind that smells like comfort and childhood. I even picked up a cinnamon pastry for Michael, thinking I might invite him over for tea later. I was still pretending everything was normal. Still pretending my son hadn't drifted into someone I barely knew. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked the same as always. The same white paint. The same maple shadows stretching across the lawn. Nothing looked out of place. But the moment I tried to unlock the door, my entire world shifted. The key wouldn't turn. I jiggled it. I pushed it in harder. I tried the spare, then the other spare. Nothing. The key rejected the lock entirely, as though the house itself were suddenly refusing to let me in. Confused, I knelt down and really looked at it. The lock was new. Chenier. Different. A strange calm washed over me. The kind of calm that comes right before the heart realizes it's breaking. I rang the doorbell, clutching the bakery bag like a lifeline. After a moment, the door cracked open. Claire stood there, her hair perfectly brushed. Not a single sign of surprise on her face. "Oh," she said lightly. "You're back early?" I stared at her. "What happened to my lock?" She smiled. A small, tight smile. The kind you give someone when you're about to hurt them but want to pretend you're not. "We changed it." "We," I whispered. She leaned her shoulder against the doorframe, as though she were relaxing in her home. "Michael, and I thought it was safer. This neighborhood is old. Anyone could pick the lock." My heartbeat kicked painfully in my chest. "Why didn't you tell me? We figured you'd be fine with it." She shrugged casually. "It's really for the best." "The best for who?" I asked, my voice low. For the first time, her smile dropped. "Listen, you've been getting forgetful lately." leaving lights on, misplacing things. Michael thinks, well, we think you should stay with Aunt Margaret for a little while, just until we update a few things. Aunt Margaret had been dead for 7 years. My stomach twisted. This is my home. Claire's eyes hardened, not with anger, but with ownership. Her voice lost all softness. Yes, but you can't keep living here if you're not capable of taking care of it. Capable. That word hit me harder than anything else. For 75 years, I had survived storms far greater than her little schemes. I had raised a son, buried a husband, endured loneliness. Capable. I had been capable long before she ever set foot into my life. But she didn't care. To her, I was an obstacle. A fragile piece of furniture she no longer wanted in the house she had already begun to imagine as hers. I took a slow breath, feeling something inside me crack. Quietly. Painfully. Give me the new key. I can't do that. She lifted her chin. We already made a plan. I felt the world tilt. I felt myself drop out of everything I thought I knew. I turned, walked to my car with a dignity I barely held together and drove. Not to a hotel. Not to Michael's. Not to any place that involved her shadow. I drove to my late sister's cabin. Tiny, dusty, cold, but safe. That night, I sat in her old bed still wearing my coat. I stared at the wooden ceiling beams and replayed Claire's voice over and over. You're not capable. We thought it'd be for the best. We changed the locks. We. Each word felt like a nail sealing the door of my own home shut. I cried for the first time in years. Not from fear, but from heartbreak. From realizing that while I had loved my son all his life, he had, in one blind moment, chosen someone else's ambition over my dignity. But beneath the tears, something else stirred. Something steady. Something sharp. Something that had been sleeping for too long. Resolve. Because no one, not even my own son, would erase me from the life I built. And Claire, for all her smug confidence, had made one fatal mistake. She thought I was powerless. She thought age made me weak. She had no idea who she was dealing with. I woke before sunrise the next morning, the cold from my sister's cabin still clinging to my bones. I hadn't slept much. Grief doesn't let you. It sits at your bedside, whispering what ifs and how could days until you finally give up on rest entirely. But somewhere in the long hours of that night, my heartbreak had crystallized into something far sturdier. Something sharper. People mistake older women for fragile things. We're not fragile. We're focused. When you reach 75, you don't waste energy on theatrics or rage. You move with purpose. Quiet, deliberate purpose. And I knew exactly what I had to do. At 6:15 a.m., I called my attorney, Mr. Aldridge, a man I'd known since Daniel was alive. His voice was thick with sleep. But the moment I explained what happened, he snapped fully awake. She changed the locks. On your house? Yes. There was a long silence. The kind filled with someone trying to process the audacity of a stranger locking an elderly woman out of her own home. Prepare yourself, he finally said. This ends today. By 8 o'clock, he and I were driving back toward my property. The sun was rising behind the rooftops, turning the frost on the grass into silver glitter. I watched the familiar streets roll by and felt the ache in my chest twist tighter with every block. This will get resolved quickly, he said. Oh, I'm not worried about speed, I replied. I'm worried about making sure it never happens again. He nodded with a soft smile, one that told me he understood far more than he said out loud. The first piece of armor in my quiet revenge was already in place. Months after Daniel died, I had transferred the house into a living trust. Not to prevent my son from inheriting one day, but to ensure that no outsider could force me to give up the home where my life still lived. The trust was airtight, ironclad, and entirely under my control. Claire had tried to move a king on a board, where she didn't even realize the queen was still standing. When we pulled into my driveway, there was already a patrol car waiting. Officer Green stepped out. A broad-shouldered man with kind eyes who had once helped me after a raccoon got stuck in my shed. He greeted me with gentle respect, something I had been starved of recently. "Mime," he said. "You ready to get your home back?" "More than ready." He nodded to the locksmith he had brought with him. The man knelt at the door and inspected the lock Claire had installed. "This was put in yesterday," he confirmed. "Cheap, too. Rush job." I didn't respond. My anger wasn't loud, it was cold quiet. Controlled. The door swung open with a click that felt like justice slipping back into place. Claire appeared in the hallway, wrapped in one of Michael's shirts. Her expression flickered from confusion to annoyance to full-blown panic when she saw me standing on the porch with an officer and my attorney. "What is this?" she snapped. "You can't just—" "Yes," Officer Green said calmly. "She can." My attorney stepped forward and handed her a set of documents. "This property belongs exclusively to her. She can ask you to leave at any time, without warning. And she is doing so now." Claire's face drained of color. But Michael. "Michael has no legal rights to this house," Mr. Aldridge said flatly. "And you have none." She opened and closed her mouth like she was drowning on words. "This is ridiculous. You can't just— This is insane. Insane," I repeated softly, stepping past her into my foyer. "I's locking a 75-year-old woman out of her own home." My voice didn't shake. My eyes didn't water. I had cried all the tears I was going to cry. Now there was only clarity. Officer Green crossed his arms. "Mom, you'll need to start gathering your belongings. You're required to vacate the property." Claire gaped at him. "But where is Michael?" "He'll fix this when he gets here." I smiled gently. "Let's hope he rushes." The officer turned to me. "Would you like us to escort her out?" I shook my head. "No, I'll take care of it." Because grace, when wielded correctly, is a far more devastating weapon than rage. I walked to the living room, the same room where Daniel and I had danced on our 25th anniversary. I reached for the first item of hers I saw, a bright pink purse sitting on my rocking chair, and carried it outside. Then another, and another. Makeup bags, shoes, scarves, jackets, perfume bottles, hair curlers, jewelry boxes. All of it. Piece by piece, I placed every single belonging she had brought into my home onto the front lawn. Not thrown, not tossed, placed. As if I were laying out items at a garage sale. Neighbors began to watch from their windows. A few stepped onto their porches. One elderly man across the street gave me a small nod of approval. Claire finally came running outside in a frenzy. "What are you doing? Are you crazy?" "Stop." I didn't even look at her. "You changed my locks." "I'm simply returning the courtesy." "You're humiliating us!" she screeched. "Then consider this a lesson," I said. "One you will remember." Her belongings kept piling. The bright dresses she bragged about. The designer shoes she thought made her important. The beauty products she had lined up in my bathroom as if she owned the place. All of it rested in the winter sun, looking strangely small now that they were out of the shadows she had cast. When Michael finally arrived, his car screeched into the driveway. He jumped out, wide-eyed. "Mom." What is going on?" I didn't stop working. I placed a pair of Claire's boots gently on the grass before turning to him. "What's going on?" I said. "Is consequences." He stared at the lawn, at Claire crying, at the officer, at the documents. Realization washed over him slowly, painfully. "You told me you needed space," he whispered. "I didn't think—" "Mom, I never meant for you to." "No," I said. "You didn't think. Not about me. Not about your father's house. Not about what was right." He swallowed hard, his voice thick. "I messed up. Yes," I said softly. "You did." The Claire ran to him, clinging to his arm. "Michael, say something. She can't do this." He looked at her, and I watched something flicker in his expression. Something like doubt. Something like regret. Something like finally seeing her clearly for the first time. But I didn't need apologies or explanations from either of them. I needed peace. And peace is what I claimed that morning. When all her belongings were finally outside. I dusted my hands off and stood straight, taller than I had felt in years. "You're both leaving now," I said. "This house is no longer open to you." Claire attempted one final outburst, but Michael stopped her with a quiet, resigned, "Let's go." They loaded what they could fit into the car in tense silence. The rest stayed on the lawn, scattered like the remnants of a failed coup. When their car pulled away, I didn't wave. I didn't glare. I simply watched the road clear as the winter sun rose a little higher, bathing the house in gold. For the first time since Daniel died, I felt powerful. And for the first time since Claire arrived in our lives, I felt free. The day after they left, the house was quieter than I'd ever heard it. Not the hollow, aching quiet that had filled it after Daniel died. No, this was different. This was peace settling into the floorboards, slipping under the doors, nestling itself between the picture frames. For the first time in months, I walked through each room and felt like I belonged within the walls again. The faded yellow wallpaper in the hallway no longer looked dated. It looked loyal. The creak in the third stair didn't sound dangerous. It sounded familiar. The old rocking chair didn't look like clutter. It looked like continuity, like the past refusing to be discarded. I made tea that morning and drank it slowly, letting the simple ritual of it root me back into myself. The world hadn't changed, not really. But I had reclaimed my place in it. There is a special strength in reclaiming something you already owned. Your home, your dignity, your voice. But there's an even deeper power in reclaiming your sense of self after someone tried to convince you that you had lost it. As I sat at the kitchen table, I realized something I hadn't admitted before. I had been shrinking long before Claire changed the locks. Grief had made me smaller. Age had made me quieter. And loneliness, though patient, had wrapped around me like a heavy quilt. Comforting, but capable of smothering me if I let it. Claire had simply taken advantage of the space I'd left empty. But I wasn't empty anymore. Not after what happened. Not after what I did to reclaim myself. Reclaiming isn't loud. It's not dramatic. It's not the kind of thing that plays out in shouting matches or slammed doors. Reclaiming is a series of small, deliberate acts. It's choosing to clean the windows yourself. It's replanting the flowers someone else trampled. It's putting your wedding ring back in the jewelry box without crying. It's walking through a home that nearly became your cage, and realizing it is still unquestionably yours. That morning, I opened all the windows and let the cold air rush in. It carried away the scent of Claire's perfume, the sharp, artificial sweetness that had lingered in the drapes. It carried away tension, bitterness, the remnants of her voice echoing in the corners. By noon, my home smelled like winter and lemon polish and the slightest memory of Daniel's aftershave. A clean start. Later, I found one final reminder of her. A gold hoop earring half buried in the grass, glinting in the sunlight like a forgotten accusation. Instead of anger, I felt a quiet, surprising sympathy. Not for her exactly, but for the kind of emptiness that drives a person to seize what isn't theirs. I placed the earring in an old tin box where I kept odd little relics. A seashell from our first beach trip, a key to a house we lived in decades ago, a dried petal from my wedding bouquet. It didn't belong with those memories, but it served as a reminder boundaries are not unkind. They are necessary. And sometimes they are the only way to protect the life you've built. That evening, the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, Michael stood there, hands shoved deep in his pockets, looking like the little boy he used to be when he'd done something wrong. His shoulders drooped, and his eyes carried the weight of guilt in every corner. "Mom," he said softly. "Can we talk?" I stepped aside. "Come in." He stood in the entryway for a moment, looking around as if seeing the house for the first time. The age of it, the love in it, the history woven into every inch. "You were right," he whispered. "About everything." I didn't speak. I didn't need to. He continued. "I let her influence me. I let her convince me you were slipping, that we had to step in. I thought I was helping. But I see now that I wasn't helping you. I was helping her get what she wanted. She wanted the house? I said. He swallowed. Yeah. I waited. And I'm sorry, he added in a voice that cracked a little. I should never have let it go that far. I should have known better. Dad would have. He didn't finish. He didn't have to. Daniel would have been disappointed. Deeply. But he also would have wanted our son to correct his mistakes. Not drown in them. I touched Michael's arm gently. You're my son, I love you. That hasn't changed. But trust has to be rebuilt. He nodded. I know. And I want to earn it back. A quiet fell over us, a softer, more forgiving kind of silence. Before he left, he asked, do you want me to come by more? Help out? I smiled. A small, real smile. I want you to come by when you want to. Not because you think I need managing. He gave a watery laugh. Deal. When he drove away, I felt a calm settle in my chest. The kind that comes when you realize someone has finally heard you after years of speaking softly. In the weeks that followed, I rebuilt my life one small decision at a time. I joined a book club. I started walking with a neighbor every morning. I reopened the old sewing room and made a quilt from scraps of Daniel's shirts. I cooked meals big enough to share with friends. I filled the house again, not with people, but with purpose. Reclaiming myself did not mean living in the past. It meant choosing what was worth carrying into the future. And I carried far more joy than hurt. One late afternoon, as I sat on the porch Daniel built, watching the sun dip behind the maple trees, I realized something that made me smile. Claire had tried to take my home. But in her attempt, she gave me something far more valuable. A reason to rise. A reason to fight. A reason to reclaim every part of myself I had let go of since the day I lost Daniel. Strength doesn't disappear with age. Sometimes it simply waits. Quietly. Patiently. Until someone is foolish enough to underestimate it. And when that day comes, that strength stands up, straightens its back, and says, not today. Not ever again. I sipped my tea, listening to the rustle of the lilac bushes. The same bushes Daniel and I planted together. The same bushes that survived storms, droughts, and winters harsher than this one. Like me, they were still standing. Still rooted. Still home. And for the first time in a long time, I felt exactly the same.